So 2 weeks ago, 2 Sundays ago, I was in St. Giles in Edinburgh. Some of you know that. For those who are Presbyterian, this is our mother kirk. That is, this is where the reformer, John Knox, preached the Protestant faith in Scotland. Now, if you saw the movie about Mary, Queen of Scots, John Knox was a really nasty sort of a fellow in that movie. I don't think he was quite that bad. But he was the reformer who brought Protestantism to Scotland, and then it was the Scotch-Irish Presbyterians who brought it to the New World. So that is why we trace our spiritual roots as Presbyterians to St. Giles in Edinburgh. Now, it's a place that's very familiar to me because over 30 years ago, in 1987, I went there as a neophyte minister. It was my first call after seminary, and I was an assistant there for not quite 2 years. So whenever I am in St. Giles, I remember. That is, I remember my sojourn there, the time I spent. I remember friends now gone. I remember the company of the faithful who've worshiped in that place for over 1,000 years. Catholics first and then Protestants. People from all over the world come to St. Giles to worship, and it is a beautiful church. And I think it's a holy place because of all those people who have prayed and worshiped there over the centuries. Now, I've stayed in touch with my Scottish friends over the years, and I try to go and visit every year or so. And yes, several of my friends now are no longer with us. But 2 weeks ago, I entered the church for the 10 a.m. communion service, and I took a seat where I often sat with my friends over the years. And as the congregation gathered, I realized that there were several empty seats all around me. I thought about my dear friends, the McCallums, Jean and Ian. They were like parents to me. I thought about my spirit sisters, Moira and Catherine, who were also ministers in the Church of Scotland, now gone. I thought about other saints and realized that they were there with me, sitting in those empty chairs, surrounding me like a great cloud of witnesses. My dad was there, and my grandparents too. I can't think of a time in my life when I felt the presence of the communion of saints so powerfully. And later, as we stood in a circle to share communion, I saw faces in the circle that were familiar, and I saw strangers. And in that moment, just for that moment, we were one. And so today is World Communion Day. It is a day for us to remember the countless host, the cloud of witnesses, the saints of old, those we love who are part of that communion. It is also a day for us to remember Christians far and near, in distant lands and around the corner, who share this meal as a way of remembering Jesus and God's endless love for all the world. This is why we call this meal communion, because it unites us with our three-in-one God. It unites us with one another here and now, and it unites us with Christians in all places and all times. It unites us with the communion of saints. We speak of this meal as communion, but we also sometimes speak of this meal as the Lord's Supper, a sacrament. The table reminds us of a table 2,000 years ago or more, a table where Jesus was sharing a Passover meal with his disciples. There were probably more than just the 12 disciples, apostles present. Next year, this church will celebrate 75 years of church history in this place, on this corner. And there are all kinds of memories here, things we remember as a church family, maybe some things we've forgotten too. But the history of this church is so short and so small compared with the whole sweep of Christian history. Our tradition has been passed on through the sacraments of baptism and the Lord's Supper. Both are signs of welcome and invitation. And so by sharing this meal, we are remembering Jesus as he asked us to do. When you do this, remember me, he said. Now, there are lots of ways of practicing this sacrament. When I was growing up, probably you had this too, the Lord's Supper was always served to us in the pews with small cups and small cubes of bread passed on those shiny silver trays, and the tray of cups was always so heavy. Many churches in the world share a common cup and drink out of that cup. Today we share the bread we have, pita bread and challah, to remind us that every culture has its daily bread, and it is the Jewish High Holy Days just now. Different churches say different words to celebrate this sacrament, but what we try to hold in common are the words that Jesus spoke when he was at the table with his disciples, and we might paraphrase them or rephrase them, but we will hear Jesus speaking to us. Take, eat, this is my body given for you. Drink to remember me. So this is a meal of remembering. Sometimes it's called a memorial, but I think that is too weak. A memorial looks back on something that is long, long past, but remembering puts something back together again. It makes something that has been broken whole. It literally remembers it. We bring new people into the circle. We widen the circle. We widen the welcome that Christ extends to us in that first and last supper. This is a powerful kind of remembering that brings something ancient into the present moment, that recognizes Christ's real presence here with us now. So we call this sacrament communion, and we call this sacrament the Lord's Supper, but we also sometimes call it the Eucharist. Now, you might think that that's a Catholic or an Anglican word, but it is a Greek word, and it is a biblical word. And Eucharist means thanksgiving. And so this is a Thanksgiving feast. Now, okay, we take only a small piece of bread and only a few drops of juice. These symbols are powerful for us because they remind us of Jesus, of his flesh and his blood life on earth, of his dying and rising. The symbols remind us that we are now Christ's body, his flesh and blood, in a very real way. This is a feast of thanksgiving. We are giving thanks to God for God's provision for us and for our ancestors throughout all of history. We're giving thanks as Christians for the divine love offered to us in Jesus Christ. We are giving thanks for the presence of the Spirit always and everywhere. Thanksgiving is a kind of remembering. Whether it is the feast we celebrate in November, or a birthday, or an anniversary, or a holiday, we are remembering with thanksgiving the years we have shared, the history that makes us who we are, the memories we share throughout our lives. This meal is a Eucharistic meal because it engenders in us gratitude. A gratitude based on our deep, deep sense that all we are and all we have are gifts. If we really believe this, then that gratitude will engender in us generosity. It will cause us to remember those who struggle financially, those without homes, those who might find gratitude hard to come by, those who are very literally hungry and thirsty. Gratitude will help us to remember the wider world, the whole creation. This sacrament on this day is a remembering of all these things, of the saints who have gone before, of Jesus' real presence with us in love, of God's provision for us always. And World Communion is also a day to remember that God so loves the world still. And as disciples at Christ's table, we are called to remember the poor, the lonely, the brokenhearted. We are to remember our brothers and sisters in places where they cannot worship freely. We are to remember Christ's prayer for unity and peace. I pray that they may all be one, Jesus said, I in them and you in me, that they may become completely one, so that the world may know that you have sent me and have loved them even as you have loved me. Let us remember these words of Jesus. And while we're remembering the saints of old, we remember that the 4th of October is the feast day of St. Francis, one of those favorite saints of God. And so I think it right that we should sing this prayer attributed to St. Francis. Lord, make me an instrument of your peace.